A man kicked a German Shepherd on the street. Seconds later, karma struck hard. In the heart of a bustling city, Darren Cole strode down the sidewalk with an air of arrogance. His tailored suit and polished shoes spoke of wealth and power, but his cold eyes betrayed a cruel nature. As he approached a busy cafe, a stray German Shepherd caught his eye, its ribs visible beneath matted fur as it begged for scraps. Darren sneered, seeing the dog as nothing more than a nuisance. Without a second thought, he lashed out with his foot, sending the animal yelping in pain. The dog skittered away, whimpering, as onlookers gasped in shock. Ethan Ward, a compassionate ex-K9 trainer who had been sipping coffee at the cafe, witnessed the heartless act. Anger flared in his chest as he rose to confront Darren. "Hey! What gives you the right to abuse an innocent animal like that?" Darren turned, his lip curling in disdain. "Mind your own business. It's just a mangy mutt. That mutt has a name. Max. And he deserves better than to be kicked around by the likes of you." Ethan's voice was steady, but his eyes blazed with righteous fury. "Whatever. I have more important things to do than argue with a bleeding heart like you." Darren brushed past Ethan, not sparing another glance for the wounded dog. As Darren disappeared into the crowd, Ethan knelt beside Max, gently examining his injuries. "It's okay, boy. I've got you now. Let's get you fixed up." He scooped the dog into his arms and headed for his shelter, determined to show Max the love and care he deserved. Little did Darren know that his callous act had set in motion a chain of events that would soon come back to haunt him. In a world where every action has consequences, his cruelty would not go unanswered. News of Darren's heartless act spread like wildfire through the tight-knit community. At Ethan's animal shelter, volunteers and supporters gathered to tend to Max's wounds and discuss the incident that had brought him into their care. "I can't believe someone could be so cruel," said Lisa, a regular volunteer, as she gently bathed Max's matted fur. "How could anyone kick a defenseless animal like that?" Ethan sighed, his heart heavy. "Unfortunately, cruelty knows no bounds. But we're here to be the light in the darkness, to show these animals the love and compassion they deserve." As word of Max's story spread, more and more people began to come forward with their own tales of Darren's callousness. Former employees spoke of his tyrannical management style, how he belittled and berated those who worked for him. Local business owners shared stories of his cutthroat tactics and unethical practices. It seemed that Darren's cruelty extended far beyond a single act of animal abuse. He had left a trail of broken spirits and shattered dreams in his wake, using his wealth and power to trample anyone who stood in his way. But as the community rallied around Max and Ethan, a spark of hope began to ignite. People from all walks of life, united by their shared disgust for Darren's actions, came together to support the shelter and its mission of compassion. Amidst the outpouring of love and support, Max slowly began to heal, both physically and emotionally. With each passing day, his tail wagged a little more, his eyes shone a little brighter. He had found a home and a family in Ethan and the shelter volunteers, a testament to the transformative power of kindness. As Ethan watched Max play with the other rescued dogs, a fierce determination settled in his heart. He would not let Darren's cruelty go unchallenged. One way or another, the arrogant businessman would learn that his actions had consequences, that true strength lay not in domination, but in compassion. Across town, Darren Cole sat in his opulent office, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. He leaned back in his leather chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips as he reviewed the details of his latest business deal. The acquisition of a struggling local company had been a particularly satisfying conquest. Darren had swooped in like a vulture, exploiting the owner's desperation to secure the takeover at a fraction of the firm's true value. With a few strokes of a pen, he had crushed a man's life's work, all in the name of profit. A knock at the door interrupted his gloating. "Come in," he barked, irritation coloring his tone. His assistant, Julia, entered, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Cole, I'm afraid I have some bad news. The acquisition deal, it's fallen through." Darren's eyes narrowed. What do you mean, fallen through? I signed the papers myself. Julia swallowed nervously. It seems that the owner had a change of heart. He found another investor at the last minute, one who offered a fair price and promised to keep the company intact. He's backing out of the deal. Rage boiled up inside Darren. How dare that pathetic excuse for a businessman defy him? He slammed his fist on the desk, making Julia flinch. This is unacceptable. Get our legal team on the phone. I want that company, and I want it now. I'm sorry, Mr. Cole, but the contract had an escape clause. There's nothing we can do. Julia's voice was barely above a whisper. Darren's face turned an ugly shade of red. Get out, he snarled. Get out, and don't come back until you have a solution. As Julia scurried from the room, Darren seethed with fury. This was a minor setback, nothing more. He would crush that insolent owner, one way or another. No one crossed Darren Cole and got away with it. But as he stared out the window at the bustling city below, a flicker of unease crept into his heart. The failed deal was just the beginning, a whisper of the reckoning to come. Darren had sown the seeds of cruelty and injustice, and now those seeds were beginning to bear bitter fruit. Ethan Ward sat at his desk in the animal shelter, poring over the flood of emails and messages that had poured in since Max's story had gone viral. Offers of support, donations, and volunteer time filled his inbox, a testament to the power of a community united against cruelty. As he read through the messages, one, in particular, caught his eye. It was from a former employee of Darren Cole, a man named Michael who had worked as a janitor in one of Darren's buildings. Mr. Ward, the message began, I saw the story about what Darren Cole did to that poor dog, and I couldn't stay silent any longer. I worked for Mr. Cole for 5 years, and in that time, I saw him do some terrible things. He would belittle and humiliate his staff, making grown men and women cry. He once fired a single mother just days before Christmas because she asked for time off to care for her sick child. But the worst was when he ordered me to dispose of a litter of kittens that had been born in the building's basement. He said they were vermin, that they didn't deserve to live. I couldn't do it, Mr. Ward. I took those kittens to a shelter, just like yours. I quit that day and never looked back. Please, keep fighting the good fight. Show the world what kind of man Darren Cole really is. Ethan's heart clenched as he read Michael's words. The cruelty Max had suffered was just the tip of the iceberg, it seemed. Darren's wickedness ran far deeper than he had ever imagined. With a renewed sense of purpose, Ethan began to reach out to the other people who had come forward with their stories of Darren's misdeeds. One by one, he pieced together a tapestry of the businessman's cruelty, a damning portrait of a man who cared for nothing but his own power and profit. As the evidence mounted, Ethan knew that he could no longer stay silent. He had to confront Darren, to make him see the error of his ways. But he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed the strength of the community behind him, the power of collective action to bring about true change. With Max by his side, a living symbol of resilience and hope, Ethan set out to rally the people of the city. Together, they would stand against cruelty and injustice, and show Darren Cole that his actions had consequences that could not be ignored. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the city, a battle between the forces of compassion and the forces of greed. In the end, only one could emerge victorious, and the fate of countless lives hung in the balance. As the sun rose over the city, Darren Cole stepped out of his high-rise apartment building, ready to face another day of conquests and acquisitions. But as he approached his sleek, black sports car, he stopped dead in his tracks. The vehicle, once a gleaming symbol of his wealth and status, was now a twisted wreck of shattered glass and torn metal. Vandals had struck in the night, leaving behind a message spray-painted in bold, red letters across the hood, "Animal Abuser." Darren's face contorted with rage as he surveyed the damage. Who would dare to do this to him? He was Darren Cole, the most powerful man in the city. No one crossed him and got away with it. As he pulled out his phone to call the police, a small crowd began to gather around the ruined car. Passers-by pointed and whispered, some even snapping photos with their smartphones. Darren's humiliation was complete, his carefully crafted image of invincibility shattered like the windshield of his beloved car. But this was only the beginning. As Darren made his way to the office, he found himself confronted at every turn by the consequences of his cruelty. Protesters gathered outside his building, waving signs and chanting slogans denouncing his treatment of animals and his employees. Business partners and clients began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man whose reputation was rapidly becoming toxic. Even his own employees turned against him, emboldened by the growing public outrage. They staged walkouts and sit-ins, demanding better treatment and fair wages. Darren's once unassailable empire began to crumble, piece by piece. Through it all, Ethan and Max were there, leading the charge for change. They organized rallies and marches, bringing together animal lovers and workers' rights advocates in a powerful coalition for justice. With each passing day, the tide of public opinion turned further against Darren, until it seemed that the entire city was united against him. And yet, even as his world collapsed around him, Darren clung stubbornly to his cruelty and arrogance. He lashed out at his critics, threatening legal action and financial ruin. He refused to see the error of his ways, blind to the fact that his own actions had set in motion the very forces that now threatened to destroy him. But as the pressure mounted, cracks began to appear in Darren's facade. Behind closed doors, he raged and cursed, his once unshakable confidence giving way to fear and desperation. He had always believed that power and wealth could protect him from anything, but now, he was beginning to realize that there were some things that money could not buy. The stage was set for a final confrontation, a reckoning that would determine the fate of Darren Cole and the city he had once ruled with an iron fist. Would he find redemption, or would he be consumed by the very darkness he had unleashed upon the world? Only time would tell, as the story hurtled towards its climax. As the protests against Darren Cole grew in size and intensity, Ethan Ward knew that the time had come for a decisive confrontation. He had watched as Darren's empire crumbled, piece by piece, but he also knew that the businessman's stubborn pride would not allow him to go down without a fight. Ethan called a meeting of his closest allies, Lisa, the shelter volunteer, Michael, the former janitor who had spoken out against Darren's cruelty, and a handful of other community leaders who had joined the cause. Together, they hatched a plan to confront Darren directly, to force him to face the consequences of his actions once and for all. They chose a day when they knew Darren would be at his office, holed up in his fortress of power and privilege. Ethan and his companions marched through the streets, Max trotting proudly at their side, until they reached the towering skyscraper that housed Darren's company. As they approached the building, they were met by a line of security guards, their faces stern and unyielding. But Ethan and his friends would not be deterred. They had come too far, fought too hard, to be turned away now. "We're here to see Darren Cole," Ethan declared, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "And we're not leaving until he agrees to meet with us." The guards exchanged uncertain glances, but before they could respond, a figure emerged from the building's revolving doors. It was Julia, Darren's assistant, her face pale and drawn. "Mr. Cole will see you now," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But he wants you to know that he's not happy about it." Ethan nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "I didn't expect him to be." With Max at his side, Ethan led his companions into the building, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They rode the elevator to the top floor, the tension thickening with each passing second. When the doors finally slid open, they found themselves in a vast, opulent office, its walls lined with expensive artwork and its floor covered in plush carpeting. And there, seated behind a massive desk, was Darren Cole himself, his face a mask of cold fury. "What do you want?" he snarled, his eyes flashing with barely contained rage. Ethan stepped forward, his gaze locked on Darren's. "We want you to face the consequences of your actions," he said, his voice steady and calm. "We want you to acknowledge the pain and suffering you've caused, and to make amends for your cruelty." Darren laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "And why should I do that? I'm Darren Cole. I don't answer to anyone, least of all a bunch of bleeding heart activists and their mangy mutt. But as he spoke, Ethan could see the cracks in Darren's armor, the fear and desperation that lurked beneath the surface. The businessman's empire was crumbling, and he knew it. You can't hide from the truth forever, Darren, Ethan said, his voice softening. Sooner or later, you'll have to face up to what you've done. And when that day comes, we'll be there to make sure that justice is served. With those words, Ethan turned and led his companions out of the office, leaving Darren alone with his thoughts and his demons. The final showdown was coming, and both men knew that only one of them could emerge victorious. In the days that followed the confrontation in Darren's office, the city held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Ethan and his allies continued to rally support for their cause, organizing marches and sit-ins that drew thousands of people from all walks of life. Meanwhile, Darren retreated further into his fortress of solitude, cutting himself off from the outside world. He fired Julia, his loyal assistant, in a fit of rage, blaming her for allowing Ethan and his companions to confront him. He barricaded himself in his office, refusing to take calls or answer emails, as his once mighty empire crumbled around him. But even as he tried to shut out the world, Darren could not escape the consequences of his actions. His business partners abandoned him, one by one, unwilling to be associated with a man whose name had become synonymous with cruelty and corruption. His personal life, too, began to unravel as long-buried secrets and scandals came to light. Through it all, Ethan and Max remained steadfast in their commitment to justice and compassion. They visited schools and community centers, sharing Max's story and spreading the message of kindness and respect for all living things. Children flocked to Max, drawn to his gentle nature and wagging tail, while adults listened with rapt attention to Ethan's words of wisdom and hope. As the weeks passed, something began to shift in the city. The anger and outrage that had once been directed solely at Darren began to give way to a new sense of purpose and unity. People from all walks of life came together, united by a common desire to build a better world, one in which cruelty and injustice had no place. Community gardens sprang up in vacant lots, as neighbors worked side by side to grow fresh produce and build bonds of friendship and trust. Abandoned buildings were transformed into shelters and community centers, places where people could come together to learn, to heal, and to support one another. As the city underwent a transformation, Darren Cole remained locked away in his office, a prisoner of his own cruelty and arrogance. He paced the floor like a caged animal, his mind churning with dark thoughts and bitter recriminations. But even as he tried to cling to his old ways, Darren could not escape the nagging sense that something had to change. The world outside his window was moving on without him, leaving him behind in the dustbin of history. One day, as he sat brooding in his office, a knock came at the door. Darren ignored it at first, assuming it was just another angry protester or disgruntled former employee. But the knocking persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing second. Finally, with a growl of frustration, Darren wrenched open the door, ready to unleash his fury on whoever dared to disturb him. But the sight that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. There, standing in the doorway, was Max, the German shepherd he had once kicked so cruelly. But the dog was not alone. Standing beside him, holding his leash, was a small girl, her face streaked with tears. "Please, mister," she said, her voice trembling. "Max wants to talk to you." Darren stared at the girl in disbelief, then at the dog. Max gazed back at him, his eyes soft and gentle, as if he knew something that Darren did not. Slowly, hesitantly, Darren stepped aside, allowing the girl and the dog to enter his office. The girl led Max to the center of the room, then took a step back, her eyes wide and watchful. For a long moment, Darren and Max simply stared at each other, the man and the dog, the abuser and the abused. Then, to Darren's amazement, Max began to speak. "I forgive you," the dog said, his voice rich and deep, filled with wisdom and compassion. "I know that you have suffered, just as I have suffered. But suffering does not have to define us. We can choose to be better, to rise above our pain and our anger, and to find the goodness that lies within us all." Darren felt tears welling up in his eyes, tears that he had not shed in years. He looked at Max, at the girl, at the city that stretched out before him, and he knew that the dog was right. He had a choice to make, a choice that would determine the course of his life and the lives of all those around him. With a shaking hand, Darren reached out and stroked Max's head, feeling the warmth and softness of the dog's fur beneath his fingers. And in that moment, he knew that he had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right. The news of Darren Cole's transformation spread like wildfire through the city. People whispered and speculated, wondering what could have caused such a profound change in the once cruel businessman. But Ethan and Max knew the truth. They had seen the change in Darren's eyes, the softening of his heart, the dawning of a new understanding. And they knew that it was only the beginning. In the days and weeks that followed, Darren threw himself into the work of rebuilding, not just his own life, but the lives of all those he had once wronged. He reached out to former employees, offering apologies and reparations for the harm he had caused. He donated money and resources to the animal shelter, helping to fund new programs and initiatives that would benefit the city's most vulnerable creatures. But perhaps most importantly, Darren began to listen. He listened to the stories of those he had once dismissed and denigrated, the voices of the marginalized and the oppressed. And as he listened, he began to understand the true depths of his own ignorance and cruelty. Ethan and Max watched with pride as Darren's transformation took hold, as the seeds of compassion and empathy that they had planted began to take root and flourish. They knew that there was still much work to be done, much healing that needed to take place. But they also knew that they had set something in motion, something powerful and unstoppable. As the city continued to change and grow, as new alliances were forged and old wounds were healed, Ethan and Max remained at the center of it all, the beating heart of a community that had learned the true meaning of strength and resilience. And every day, as the sun rose over the city streets, Ethan and Max would set out on their rounds, spreading their message of hope and compassion to all who would listen. For they knew that the fight for justice and kindness was never truly over, that there would always be more work to be done. But they also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and they had the love and support of an entire city behind them. And with that knowledge, they faced the future with courage and determination, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead. As the months passed, the city continued to thrive under the guidance of Ethan, Max, and the newly reformed Darren Cole. The once divided community had found a new sense of unity and purpose, working together to create a better world for all its inhabitants, both human and animal alike. The animal shelter, once a struggling operation, had become a model of excellence, thanks in large part to Darren's generous support. New facilities were built, new programs were launched, and countless animals were given a second chance at life and love. But the shelter was only the beginning. With Darren's help, Ethan and Max launched a series of initiatives aimed at promoting compassion and empathy throughout the city. They visited schools and community centers, sharing their message of kindness and respect for all living things. They worked with local businesses to promote animal-friendly policies and practices, and they partnered with government officials to enact new laws and regulations that would protect the most vulnerable members of society. Through it all, Max remained a constant presence, a living symbol of the power of resilience and forgiveness. Children flocked to him, drawn to his gentle nature and boundless enthusiasm, while adults marveled at his ability to inspire hope and healing in even the darkest of times. As the city continued to evolve and grow, Ethan and Max knew that their work was far from over. There would always be new challenges to face, new obstacles to overcome. But they also knew that they had the strength and the support of an entire community behind them, a community that had learned the true meaning of compassion and unity. And so, with Max by his side and the love of an entire city in his heart, Ethan set out each day to make the world a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder. For he knew that every act of compassion, no matter how small, had the power to change lives and transform the world. As the first anniversary of Max's fateful encounter with Darren approached, the city was abuzz with excitement and anticipation. Plans were made for a grand celebration, a day of joy and remembrance that would honor the incredible journey that had brought them all together. On the morning of the anniversary, the streets were filled with people from all walks of life, united in their love and appreciation for Max and the countless animals like him. Banners and balloons fluttered in the breeze, while music and laughter filled the air. At the center of it all stood Ethan and Max, surrounded by their closest friends and allies. Darren was there, too, his face lined with emotion as he reflected on the incredible transformation that had taken place within himself and the city he called home. As the celebration began, Ethan took the stage, his voice ringing out clear and strong across the gathered crowd. He spoke of the power of compassion and the importance of standing up for what was right, even in the face of adversity. He paid tribute to Max, the brave and loyal dog who had started it all, and to the countless other animals who had touched their lives and their hearts. But even as he spoke, Ethan knew that the true hero of the day was not himself, or even Max, but the community that had rallied around them. It was the thousands of individuals who had chosen to stand up and make a difference, who had opened their hearts and their minds to the possibility of a better world. As the celebration continued, Ethan watched with pride as the city came together in a display of unity and compassion that would have been unthinkable just a year before. He saw neighbors embracing one another, former enemies working side by side, and animals of all kinds being treated with the love and respect they deserved. And in that moment, Ethan knew that the true legacy of Max's story was not just the transformation of one man, or even one city, but the transformation of the human spirit itself. For in the end, it was not just about the animals, or the environment, or any one cause, but about the fundamental truth that we are all connected, all deserving of love and compassion and respect. As the sun began to set on that glorious day, Ethan looked out over the city that had become his home, and he knew that the journey was far from over. There would always be more work to be done, more hearts to be touched, more lives to be changed. But he also knew that he would never be alone, that he had the love and support of an entire community behind him, now and forever. And so, with Max by his side and the world stretched out before him, Ethan set out once more, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that compassion and empathy would always light the way. In the years that followed, Ethan and Max's legacy continued to grow and flourish, spreading far beyond the borders of their beloved city. Their story became a beacon of hope and inspiration to people all over the world, a shining example of the power of compassion to change lives and transform communities. Darren Cole, once the embodiment of cruelty and greed, had become a true ally in the fight for a better world. He used his wealth and influence to support countless charitable causes, from animal welfare organizations to environmental protection groups. He became a vocal advocate for social justice and equality, using his platform to amplify the voices of those who had been silenced and marginalized for too long. Meanwhile, the animal shelter that had once been the center of Max's story had grown into a national model of excellence, a shining example of what was possible when compassion and dedication were put into practice. Under Ethan's guidance, the shelter had expanded its programs and services, reaching out to communities in need all across the country. But even as their influence grew, Ethan and Max never lost sight of what truly mattered. They continued to work tirelessly to promote compassion and empathy, to build bridges between people and animals, and to create a world in which every living being was treated with the love and respect they deserved. And through it all, Max remained a constant presence, a living symbol of the power of resilience and forgiveness. Though he grew older and grayer with each passing year, his spirit never wavered, his love for the world and all its creatures never diminished. As Ethan watched Max play with the children who flocked to the shelter, he knew that the dog's legacy would live on long after they were both gone. For in the end, it was not about them, or any one individual, but about the countless lives they had touched, the countless hearts they had opened. And so, with a sense of peace and gratitude in his heart, Ethan looked to the future, knowing that the work he and Max had begun would continue, carried forward by the love and compassion of all those who had been touched by their story. For in the end, that was the true miracle of Max's journey, the true testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of times. As the world continued to change and evolve, Ethan and Max's legacy only grew stronger and more enduring. Their story had become a part of the fabric of society, a touchstone for all those who believed in the power of compassion and the importance of standing up for what was right. But even as they were celebrated and honored, Ethan and Max never lost sight of what truly mattered. They continued to work tirelessly to promote compassion and empathy, to build bridges between people and animals, and to create a world in which every living being was treated with the love and respect they deserved. And as the years passed, they began to see the fruits of their labors in ways they had never imagined possible. The city that had once been a place of division and strife had become a model of unity and cooperation, a shining example of what was possible when people came together in the spirit of compassion and understanding. The animal shelter that had been the center of Max's story had grown into a global network of care and support, reaching out to communities in need all over the world. And the countless individuals whose lives had been touched by Ethan and Max's message had gone on to become leaders and advocates in their own right, carrying the torch of compassion and empathy into every corner of society. But even as the world changed and grew, one thing remained constant: the bond between Ethan and Max, the unbreakable connection that had brought them together and sustained them through every challenge and triumph. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished, all the lives they had touched and the hearts they had opened, they knew that their journey had been a true testament to the power of love and compassion to change the world. And so, with a sense of peace and gratitude in their hearts, Ethan and Max looked to the future, knowing that their legacy would live on long after they were gone. For in the end, they had not just changed the world, but had shown others how to change it for themselves, one act of kindness at a time. In the end, it was not the grand gestures or the sweeping reforms that truly mattered, but the small, everyday acts of compassion and kindness that had the power to transform lives and communities. For Ethan and Max, this had always been the heart of their message, the core of their mission to create a better world for all. And as they looked back on all they had accomplished, all the lives they had touched and the hearts they had opened, they knew that their journey had been a true testament to the power of love and compassion to change the world. They thought of the countless animals they had saved and the families they had brought together, the communities they had strengthened and the bridges they had built between people of all backgrounds and beliefs. They thought of the laughter of children and the wagging of tails, the tears of joy and the smiles of gratitude that had been their constant companions along the way. And they knew that, in the end, it was not the destination that mattered, but the journey itself, the daily act of putting one foot in front of the other and choosing to make a difference, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. For Ethan and Max, this had always been the true miracle of their story, the true testament to the resilience and beauty of the human spirit. And as they looked to the future, they knew that their work was far from over, that there would always be more compassion to share, more kindness to spread, more love to give. But they also knew that they would never be alone, that they had the love and support of an entire world behind them, now and forever. And with that knowledge, they faced the future with courage and hope, ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that compassion and empathy would always light the way. And so, hand in hand, heart to heart, Ethan and Max set out once more, ready to embrace the world and all its wonders, to share their message of love and hope with all who would listen. For in the end, that was the true legacy of their journey, the true gift they had given to the world, the knowledge that every act of compassion, no matter how small, had the power to change lives and transform the world, one heart at a time.